Talking with Forest Park on Waycross Community Media. We're here today with Forest Park City Manager Ray Hodges and also Assistant City Manager Andy Levandusky. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So every session that we have a Talking with Forest Park, we make sure we talk about things that are coming up to make sure we can connect the residents of Forest Park to what's going on. And as we're at the beginning of a new year, 2019, there is a new strategic plan for Forest Park to talk about.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why we brought Andy on to the show today, because Andy's actually been working on finalizing the details of this plan. So I'd like Andy to maybe kind of explain what the strategic plan is, because it's important for residents to know. And you probably have a few questions you want to ask Andy, but Andy, if you would, just explain a little bit of what this strategic plan is.
Yeah, so every year during the budget, we always construct a strategic plan. But we've only done it in more of a simplistic form. This year, we decided to do a more comprehensive version of that strategic plan. So we're going to have, it'll be a little more visual. You'll be able to see a lot more items and be able to decipher what we're trying to do in the upcoming year and the years to come.
And one of the things that's important for residents to appreciate, when they look at the strategic plan, they'll be able to see exactly where the city is going in 2019 in every department. We're going to cover every phase of our operation. Again, you may have some specific questions for Andy, and he can give you some details about it, but we're going to cover the entire operation in terms of what's going to be accomplished in 2019 and actually beyond that point.
What are some examples of some of the specific items that we can see in there then?
Well, we're going to have, first off, we're going to talk about our vision, our mission, and our value statements. So we've updated all those this year. We've done this in the past, but we've definitely updated that this year. You'll see 6 major goals that the city's trying to follow, and then underneath each goal will be details of each major goal that we're trying to accomplish. And then we'll break it down by department, and each department will have its own visual representation. A big example of that would be Public Works, the street department. You'll see the grade of all the streets in a pie graph, and we'll tell you what we're trying to do in the future and what roads we're going to be doing next year. That's just one example of what we're trying to accomplish.
Now that's only one little part of it, but I think it's important if you just focus on that for a minute. When you look at the road conditioning information that we'll provide, it will give you a very good visual and detailed explanation of the conditions of the streets as we rate them and the streets that we will be improving in 2019 and the ones that are a little further out. So that's just one example of saying that's a resource that residents will be able to go and find out specifics as it relates to them, their property, their neighborhood. A lot of details will be in there.
Yes.
I think that's important because a lot of times we feel like we can't really know what's going on in our local government, and we feel like, I don't know, I don't know if they're planning to do something with this or not, or with that or not, and this is a way that you have codified it and put it out so that everybody can access that and see what's coming. Why is it important for a town to have a strategic plan and not just sort of take things as they go? Oh, the street needs something now, we have to look at that.
I think it's highly important for, first off, from a transparency point, to let the public know what we're doing and to show them what our goals are coming up in the future. And that's the number one thing. Number two, we are in the process of transitioning from one city manager to another. So this will be highly important for the new city manager to review and fully understand, to get a glimpse of what's going on in the city, at least for 2019 and going forward.
So that'll be continuity, so that even as they see things change, they'll know there is a strategic plan and that we are moving forward on certain projects.
Right, and I think it gives the entire community, the next city manager, the residents, the city council, the department heads, an opportunity to evaluate what we're doing, how we're doing, and whether or not we want to continue in that direction down the road. But if you want to change directions, you'll have that opportunity. You just first need to know what direction we were going in to start with.
Correct.
Right. And I spent a little time today reading, actually, the budget is posted on the website. And looking at that document, there is so much other information in that history of Forest Park, the demographics and the statistical makeup of Forest Park and all kinds of information. And this will this also be available on the website?
Yes. Right now, we're hoping to have it completed by the end of January. If that happens, it'll get approved and put on the website.
Okay, so that's something that residents can look to. I want to review the strategic plan of Forest Park. They can go to forestpark.org and it will be there. And I noticed you have a lot of documents. You just have a link right at the bottom to all the documents that you have posted there.
Yes.
That's fantastic. What are some of the people that you hope will be looking at this? Do you have a specific audience that you're hoping will see this plan?
I would just say all residents, businesses can look at it. I mean, it'll be available for everybody to view. And then Ray may have some further comments on that.
Well, Andy's absolutely right. But because it's going to be out on our website, it's going to be available for the world to see. And to that extent, we said, well, there are prospective businesses that are interested in locating in the Cincinnati area. They may be interested in Forest Park. They'll be able to go and see exactly what Forest Park is doing. Now, the details that Andy will have in the strategic plan, they're really information and detail points that are in our budget, as he mentioned. But our budget is very, very detailed, and it is a financial document. It's all there, but it's not as easily recognized and understood and maybe appreciated as the strategic plan will be. It'll be a little easier for residents to fully understand what direction we're going in. We have dollars and cents in every line item of our budget, but sometimes it's hard for somebody to appreciate exactly what that means because there are so many different parts to our budget that to tie them all together and understand that's what makes one big project becomes a little more difficult. This will make it very easy for people.
That's excellent, because looking at a properly prepared budget sometimes requires some background that we don't all have. So the fact that you'll also have the strategic plan posted, which will explain where it's going in a way that we can all understand,
Right.
I think that's tremendously helpful. So that's
Yes.
excellent. I'm glad to see this go. I'm looking forward to seeing it finished and posted so that I can read it and be ready for the next time we get to talk.
Well, as Andy indicated, he should be wrapping it up this month, and it should be available at the beginning of next month.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming to tell us about this.
Thank you for having me.
Is there anything else you want us to know about this plan before we finish this?
Well, only that it's a working document. This is not something that you get and you put on the shelf. It's something you get and you consider whether or not this is the direction you want to go in. This is the direction the community wants to go in. Are you comfortable with it? You need to ask those kind of questions, and the way it will be laid out will be in such a manner that you'll be able to say, do I share this vision? And if you don't share that vision, then you need to talk with council, you need to talk with other residents, but at least you know what the vision is for Forest Park.
That's excellent. And I agree, residents will read this and see where their city is going, but prospective businesses looking at whether or not this is a city they want to be in, and people moving to the area, looking at houses and neighborhoods, this will be a great resource for all these different groups of people, I think.
Yeah, and it'll also, at the end of, probably the end of 2019, it'll give us as departments in the city a chance to review it and see if we accomplished everything in there. Because most of this is details for going through 2019 and a little bit into 20. But we'll be able to review and see how much, hopefully we accomplished the majority of it.
Yeah, it's hard to see where you're going if you
Right.
haven't put a plan forward to see how
Right.
far along that you've achieved.
Right.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Okay.
You are watching Talking with Forest Park, and we're going to take a short break, and we will be right back. Welcome back to Talking with Forest Park. We are here with City Manager Ray Hodges and also with Community Development Director Chris Anderson, because we have some things going on that we want to make sure we get to talk about in Forest Park.
Exactly.
Thanks so much for joining us, Chris.
All right, thank you.
And one of the things that has come up recently at the city council meetings, and it's coming up this year, is that the state has a star rating for child care providers, and that affects the residents and the providers in Forest Park.
Right. primarily the providers and people that need care for their children. The star rating is called Step Up to Quality, and the initial, obtaining a Step Up to Quality rating, that's a 1-star rating, that's like a threshold that has been optional up till now. In 2020, it's going to become mandatory for any program that wants to accept vouchers from the state, because state provides support for child care for moderate and low-income families. And that's an important part of how child care is delivered in Ohio. So we had an agency called 4C for Children come to the city council meeting, and just to alert us that really less than half of our providers have a quality rating. We have the numbers, it's 41 daycare providers, and they're split between people that do it in their homes and then child care centers. Most of the time, I think folks tend to focus on child care centers because they're more visible, they're larger, they have staffs. Those are the ones that more of them have the star ratings at this time. I think for some of the family daycares, they didn't really see the need for it. It didn't affect how many kids they had. They can only have so many to begin with.
Right.
And it wasn't so much a business necessity for them. But with this coming down the road, 4C for Children was just asking Forest Park, can you help us get the word out? And our city manager was interested enough in it that we invited them to come to our staff meeting, did some additional research on just how this lays out for Forest Park. And really, actually, we found out when we met the second time is that we're no worse off than any other part of the county. It's we're right about average, a little above average in terms of the number that have gotten the quality ratings. So we're going to be, when we go to inspections, we're going to be handing out information for that. We have an article on our website. New child care providers go through our planning commission, so we'll certainly mention that as part of staff reports and discussion there. But just keep that in the forefront.
So one of the key aspects for us is it's really not the city that is regulating this, it's the state. But it will directly affect the businesses, and it will affect anyone that is in need of child care services. Chris mentioned that we have some that have a 1-star rating, but Chris, you might talk a little bit about the number of ratings without necessarily going into details on all of them. But you get a certain star and you're at a certain level, but in any case, you're going to have to get at least 1 star, but there are more stars for these businesses.
I think the 1-star rating is really just a sort of basic class and then some reporting, statistical reporting to the state. And then you get the Step Up to Quality rating. And I should mention, all licensed child care providers are inspected. They have been all the while. This is not necessarily a safety issue. This is to try to bring more education and family interaction into play. You hear a lot about early childhood education, universal preschool. This is sort of along those lines. To make sure that instead of just being babysat, that the child is being given an opportunity to learn, that they're, things that you watch for health-wise with kids that age are being watched. So the more that they do, the more that they interact with families, those star ratings get higher. And we have 2 5-star child care centers, so they've reached the maximum.
Okay. So 5 is the highest number of stars they can get.
Yeah, 1 to 5.
And I want to recap because there were some really important things kind of all together here. And one of them is the city's role in this. The city is getting the word out, but this isn't a city rating. This isn't a city project. This is that the state is going to start requiring this, and the city's just helping them because our residents will need to know this, but also businesses using these childcare centers will need to know this. So it will help our residents to get this, but it's not the city doing this program.
No, in fact, when the program manager from 4C for Children came to the council meeting, we were no more aware, I think, than most anyone else that this was a pending requirement. And it's good to know because we do interact with those providers on a regular basis.
I think, I just want to mention this because some people watching this program may not be from Forest Park, and you may be watching this program. This is a statewide requirement. So
Oh, yeah.
this is something for everyone who happens to be coming across this segment to pay attention to. That, and it's not just the child care centers, it's all of the home care locations too. And they're locations that may have less funding for keeping up with certifications and
Certainly.
things like that. Are there things that I think 4C had, 4C for Children that came to the meeting had programs? Are there programs they can reference to help them get into line with this by 2020 so that they can get that checked off?
Yeah, that organization does do training and coaching.
Okay.
They refer to it as in terms of going over plans and business models, that sort of thing, to help people achieve what they're wanting to achieve in terms of that star rating.
Okay.
And that's offered at no extra cost.
Okay, so 4C for Children, and we'll make sure we'll put the website on this program to make sure that folks can access that, because if they are a home provider or a center, they'll want to make sure they get in touch with them.
Certainly. We also, as a community, want to make sure that this is a service that's still available and convenient for our residents, for people who work in Forest Park, really anyone that has small children and is in need of a place to have them cared for.
Yeah, this is, I really am impressed with Forest Park. I know that they travel to lots of towns to make sure, hey, you guys be aware this is coming. And like you said, not many of us were aware that these new requirements were coming by 2020. Right. I haven't seen as many other towns pick up and say, wait, we need to help you get the word out, because this is our businesses in the town are using these child care centers for their workers, and we want to make sure that they're ready to go. So is there any place else that they should know to look for more information about this?
State of Ohio.
Okay.
That would be childcare.oh.gov, I think.
Right. Okay. And we're going to follow up with having more information in our community newsletter. We'll have it on our webpage, and if they access Forest Park, then that is part of our commitment to help to get the word out.
Okay.
But on that website, a person you can enter just the zip code, Forest Park. There are different ways to search.
Okay.
But it'll bring up a list of the providers and their information, including that star rating.
Okay, and that's on the State of Ohio site.
Yes, it is.
Okay, but also the forestpark.org will continue to have, and so we want to make sure that all the residents keep looking there to see what kind of connections they can find. And
Right,
like
we
yeah.
won't have the kind of search portal that they do.
Right.
But right now we have an article summarizing the issue.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for making sure we get a chance to talk about this. This is, like we said, not just a Forest Park issue, but Forest Park is taking particular interest in making sure people know about it. So
Right.
we want to make sure we spend some time on it today.
Right. Yeah, because we're working on a lot of items and covering a lot of areas, and that's just one of the areas. And of course, we got other areas that we're working on, which is one of the reasons we brought Chris on, because we want to talk about some of the things that are going on in the neighborhood, that are affecting residents.
Yes. So since we have Community Development Director here, Chris, there are other neighborhood issues that come up. And when I'm at the council meetings, and I'm just going to take a moment to say, you can watch your council meetings. They're on Waycross, they're streaming live. You're missing out if you're not watching, because these neighborhood issues come up. And that was a shameless plug. One of the things that came up at a recent council meeting was an issue one of the residents was having with a neighbor in their neighborhood. And could you tell us a little bit more about what that was?
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, it's one reason I like my job. People ask me what I do. I say I'm never 100% sure because some of these things come up, just seemingly overnight.
Yeah.
This actually was a problem that did not develop overnight, but
Okay.
it was a nuisance issue with stray and feral cats, cats that have never been pets, or are the progeny of former house pets that became strays.
Right. And if I can interrupt just for a second, so we often refer to it as maybe a little more technical, feral cats,
Yeah.
but commonly we're talking about cats that are wild in many cases. Some are wild to the extent they've never interacted in a more domesticated environment. So that becomes the issue where we're not necessarily just talking about little fluffy kittens.
Right.
We're
This is not
talking about
someone
wild
escaped
cats.
house pets. These are feral cats in the
Correct,
neighborhood.
correct.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and once they reach adulthood, they're really not suitable for. It doesn't suit them or the family for them to try to live in a house. They won't. They're just not adoptable in that manner.
Yeah.
And that becomes part of the difficulty
Right.
that we're dealing with. And that's why anytime we start the conversation, I try to emphasize we're not necessarily talking about little fluffy kittens. We're talking about cats that people would consider wild.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and they're predators as well.
So
ahead.
what we had at the meeting was someone who there were feral cats, not escaped house pets, but feral cats in their neighborhood, and they were causing some problems. They weren't just one or two walking through their backyard. They were causing some problems. So what was going on?
Well, they were mainly tearing up landscaping, feces and urine problems around houses. And then the sheer number of them, it's a little strange if you're going on a typical suburban street to turn down the street and then see cats all over the place. It looks a little like
It looked
a
like
horror
an
movie or
Alfred
something.
Hitchcock film
Yes,
with
exactly,
cats
yeah.
just,
Right.
wow,
Watching
okay.
it. Yeah.
Instead of the birds, it's cats.
It's the
Exactly,
cats,
Right.
yeah.
okay.
They chased away the birds.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's a musical, but yes.
Right, Chris, it's probably fair to say that because we live in essence
Yeah.
next to a forest area, it's not unusual that you're going to have wildcats in the environment. So the fact that there were some wild was not the unusual aspect of this.
It was the gathering of them.
the gathering, the numbers, and the reasons that they were gathering. So that's what we need to talk about.
So they were not just in this neighborhood because they just selected it as their new neighborhood. They were in this neighborhood because someone was luring them there.
Correct.
And I'll say I think a neighbor was feeding them. And even though they're wild animals and not pets, they were kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong. And so that was
Oh, it was
bringing them
their
into the
intention to
neighborhood,
feed the wild animals.
Okay.
And that's why normally this kind of thing, you could almost say let nature take its course because it will. Cats are not our biggest problem with nuisance animals. We have
Okay.
more calls about skunks and coyotes,
Oh,
actually.
wow. Okay.
And some of the calls for coyotes are, someone has heard one howl or just wants to know more information, but also specific sightings. And skunks are our number one nuisance animal. But in this case, there was food being put out on a daily basis, and these cats were gathering in ever greater numbers, reproducing,
Okay.
and setting up essentially a colony on a small cul-de-sac that had
Okay.
only 6 houses. And so you can imagine that's a concentration that starts to affect your quality of life. And when we had the initial report from the one neighbor and talked to the neighbor that had been putting the food out, and there was some fundamental disagreement on whether that was a good idea or not.
Okay.
In the end, we ended up citing that neighbor to court in fining for contributing to the malicious activity of these cats. So we had evidence that they had torn up the shrubbery and that sort of thing. And because that resident was feeding the cats, it gave them some responsibility for that. Because if they hadn't been feeding them, that's the logic. The actual feeding is not currently, it's not against the law. There's nothing in the ordinance that says you may not put food out for cats or other wild animals. Okay. And I'm sure that there are people here and there that do.
Okay.
This was a case, though, of just the numbers got too great. And we had a meeting with, we announced we were going to have a meeting about this, and we had several of the neighbors come in, 5 households altogether, and which is pretty good on this small cul-de-sac. And it was interesting to me because there was a consensus that this was a problem. The resident that was putting the food out didn't even really claim to like cats.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Wanted to make sure that all the wildlife was healthy and happy and well fed. And what I can get back again to, like, you're taking things out of balance. Those cats would not have multiplied without a food source like this. And so the immediate thing, if you're in a hole, and the first thing to do is stop digging.
Stop digging, right.
So was to get her to cease feeding the cats. And it's been it's been some difficulty in getting compliance on that, but it's certainly not in the scale or frequency that we were seeing before. And then we are going to be engaging a wildlife contractor to do some trapping. And we have agreement from all of the residents, including the one that was feeding, to put traps on their property, because everyone does agree that this has gone too far.
Okay.
And they would like to see that population thinned out. And so that's coming very soon. We just opened purchase orders this year, so we're gearing up for that. And then we are looking at some revisions to our ordinances. One is if someone is a repeat offender in this area, that there could be an escalating fine. And we needed to do that in some other areas of code enforcement and animal control. Typically for that one person who just is wants to be difficult.
There's a reason for every rule, right?
Yeah, well, I always say beware a little bit of laws that have names on them.
Yes,
so.
yeah.
But in any case, nothing too extreme. I mean, these are incremental adjustments to our ordinances, but where we really needed to kind of come down hard in this case, we didn't have every tool that we wanted in the toolbox. I mentioned that it's not really against the law to feed them, so that created some confusion on just, we had a resident saying, show me where it says I can't do this, and we had to explain that, that's not there, but it does make you responsible if they cause problems, and they are causing problems. We have evidence, and but we had that neighborhood meeting, and what I was really surprised and glad to see was the meeting itself was contentious, as you might imagine. You had 2 different points of view, and there was a lot of discussion about that. But I was glad to see everybody left friends. In fact, 2 people that I thought on first glance, must not have liked each other, they made sure to walk out together. So, and many of these are longtime residents, up to 55 years in one case.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so, I think if we can get through this, and I think there's probably no lasting harm done. Everyone, is being, I think, mature and responsible in approaching this.
And I think that's key because we know that there was an issue, and the city agreed with the neighbors that felt it was a problem. It was not what Forest Park wanted in terms of an overpopulation of cats, but at the same time, rather than start out with just coming down as a heavy-handed government, Chris took the lead and called residents in and said, let's talk about it, and let's talk about what the problem is, and let's talk about what the city could do and will do, or at least would plan to do. And together, you know, if we can, we will come to an agreement. If not, we'll at least have a better understanding. And I believe on all points, we edged further in terms of having a better plan, having a better understanding, maybe getting a little more cooperation, and knowing that, yeah, the city is going to do something. And hopefully it will be in a manner that will make the whole neighborhood better, as well as the city as a whole.
I'll say, watching it from the beginning, when it first was brought up at a meeting, watching it get immediately referred to city manager to look into the matter further, I liked what I was seeing with the process from a resident's perspective. A resident had a concern, and instead of being told it's not something we do, they said, let's see what we can do. But then, like you said, it was also, what should government do in this situation? Rather than just coming down and saying, we're going to do this, it was, you looked into great detail into what ordinances do we have and what does this affect. And we don't have an ordinance against feeding, but we do against damage and being responsible for the damage that was.
Right.
And bringing the whole neighborhood in.
Yeah, and one other point that I think is important. We need to address this not only for the residents involved, but we also need to address it for the wildlife. We have to be concerned with the wildlife and the balance of wildlife. And I'm quick to say, you know, this is not a zero tolerance type of approach. This is an approach where we have to have a wholesome balance for the community as well as the wildlife. The wildlife, the forest area is what we are about, and we need to work at preserving it.
It's all happened in the microcosm of a small cul-de-sac neighborhood. But I'm glad that we got to see it also as a microcosm of their town government stepping in and helping them facilitate this without just fixing it for them, but helping them figure out how as a community they can work together on that. So that's good. It has a good ending. The neighbors are still friends.
Right.
That's important.
I don't necessarily find that surprising, actually, because if you think about it, if you're in a large, dense, diverse area, you may notice that there's a problem. You probably don't know where it's coming from or who's causing it, because there's just so many people, so many different people coming and going. But here, this is, as you say, a small cul-de-sac, a microcosm, people that know each other. They're able to, you know, they know what's going on in their area, and so they were able to identify that problem very easily.
Yeah, and one last point I want to offer, because this is all under our segment of the city addressing feral cats and that issue. But for the neighbors, it was really broader than that, because as this resident was setting out food, in their mind, they're doing a good thing, but for other residents, they're attracting skunks, and they're attracting raccoons, and they're attracting all kind of wildlife, and that's not what people were buying into in terms of trying to live in that neighborhood. That's what was being artificially thrown out of balance, not just attracting of cats, but most people don't want skunks, raccoons, and possums, and everything else running amok in their neighborhood.
So this was contributing to more than initially was intended. It was, seemed like a nice thing to put out some treats, but it turned out to be affecting a lot more than that.
Like anything, it can be taken too far.
Right, and I think that's the point, taken too far.
Yeah, that's key. I like that it's an example of when residents are seeing anything they need help with. Is there an ordinance on this? My neighbor got this many cars and they're covering up the apron, or my neighbor has this going on, that they know that they have a recourse and that you will help them figure out what's going on and work with the neighborhood and not just kind of come down and beyond the cats. Actually, I really want to thank you for coming in to talking about this, because how this is resolved really, I think, impacts more than just one neighborhood, and it's an issue that people may be seeing in their other neighborhoods as well, but also to let them know that they can talk to their city manager, they can talk to their local town officials and find out what's going on and how they can find a resolution for difficulties they're having. As we're starting to wrap up, there are a few more things I think that we want to make sure we mention.
Right. And one of them, and I'm glad Chris is here because this is related to his area, is the issue of aggregation. That's a big item. We won't have opportunity to go into details right now, but Chris, can you comment on that for us?
We're moving towards having it on the ballot in May. That's the short answer. But it's this gas and electric aggregation and opt-out program, which means that the city would have everybody enrolled who didn't decide specifically to opt themselves out. And it's a way of obtaining lower prices.
Lower prices for gas and electric
for utility bills, and also to promote green energy and renewable energy sources. That's if a community decides to do that. Cincinnati did that, and we have a very strong environmental program.
Right.
What we're doing,
and I think it's fair to say there are many communities around here that have aggregation programs,
for sure.
and they're taking advantage of it. Their residents are paying less for utilities than many of the residents here at Forest Park, and we believe that residents in Forest Park should at least have the opportunity to say,
Sure.
do you want to lower your utility bills every month by means of an aggregation program?
but right, yes, and so this is going before the city council next week.
On the 22nd of January?
22nd of January. And currently there's a petition drive underway just to demonstrate support for putting it on the ballot. And then at that point it will be, we recommend it, but it's for the residents to decide by their vote. And they're two separate issues because gas and electric, are, being different utilities, you can't lump them together. So that's typical when these come up on ballots in communities.
And
But it's key to emphasize we are anticipating, recommending, and there is a great possibility that the issues will be on the ballot in May.
May.
which is coming up quickly. And I anticipate actually that we will talk about this in more detail soon. So all I'll mention now is that, so all this is aggregation means if you're a little house, you can't get a great deal because you only use this much electricity or gas. But what if all the people in the houses of Forest Park got together and bought their gas? Maybe we can get a better deal. And that's all aggregation is just
Increasing
buying
your
it together.
bargaining power.
Yeah.
Right, we're increasing our bargaining power by increasing the numbers of buyers. Instead of one buyer trying to negotiate a price, now you got an entire city. So the next time we come on, we're going to bring on Wright Gwynn, who is the individual leading the charge on this in our environmental area. And we'll be glad to talk about it in much greater detail.
Yes, I'm looking forward to getting to do that. And are there other things coming up that we want to make sure we mention and don't wait for?
Well, there's actually a lot of things that we're working on, and we won't go into details right here, but we're working with residents in terms of changing a couple of routes in our refuse collection programming, as you would. And again, there may be some other things Chris want to mention, but if you give us a few hours, we'll go through a whole list of them. But
Right, and
we want to wrap it up.
that's a little longer than we have slotted for this program. But I will say, forestpark.org, if you go there, it's continually updated with the new things that are going on, and city council meetings where you can go and find out what they're talking about. And that's definitely the way to keep up in between our Talking with Forest Park programs, which of course is my favorite way to keep up. I'm completely biased on that. Is there anything else that you would like to make sure that we cover, Chris?
I think we've hit the high points for now, but thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for updating us on the saga of the feral cats in the neighborhood, which I've now dubbed it, sorry. And thank you so much, as always, Ray, for coming in and helping us stay up to date on all the things going on in Forest Park.
Well, thank you for being here with us, to host us, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk to the residents of Forest Park.
That's fantastic. Thank you for watching Talking with Forest Park. That means you are keeping up to date on what's going on in your own city, and we'll see you next time.